Carthage must be destroyed. Today we are looking at the last part of the hand-to-hand combat chapter in the Hail Caesar rulebook. We are going to be looking at combat results, reallocating some casualties, break tests, and end of combat. We're not going to get heavily into break tests because there's an entire chapter dedicated to break tests, but we're just going to go over basically what a break test is. And so let us begin. Every time in Hail Caesar you'll have a turn, and during your turn you might have a round of combat. And after that round of combat ends, you want to see what the combat results are. So let's set this up. Let's say that this unit and this Triarii unit and this Principe unit, they're all fighting here. And we'll just set this up. So these guys have support from the back, and these guys have support from the flank, okay? So we've got some Italians here, just some Italian hill tribesmen, we'll call them Samnites. So combat results are really easy to figure out in Hail Caesar. You basically take the amount of combats that each side sustained, and you compare them to each other. So let's just do that really quick. Let's say that these guys are fighting, and after all the fighting, they took 3 wounds, and this side here took 2 wounds. Okay, they took 3, they took 2, so these guys have taken more wounds, so they've essentially lost, they've taken more damage. The Romans have won by 1 because you take the highest number, which is 3, subtracted by the smaller number, which is 2. So the Romans won this combat by 1. Very simple, right? So the side that has dealt the most casualties is the winner. Now it should be said, when you are tallying up your casualties, you're not going to be looking at anything that happened before the fighting units and the support units dish out their attacks. So when you are adding up and tallying your combat results, you don't take into consideration traversing shots or closing shots. Those are separate, and they are not counted into actual fighting. The combat results here are all based off hand-to-hand combat. Now, you can in Hail Caesar, of course, have draws. If both sides inflicted 3 wounds on each other, 3 casualties on each other, it would be a draw. And in the case of a draw, nothing would happen unless your units are shaken, and we'll get into that soon. Oh, my dog is crying here. Let's subtract that casualty from the Romans in here again. Now here the Romans would have won, and what you have to do is you have to find out what happens to this unit. It may either be shattered, or it will have to take a break test, where you roll dice to see basically what happens to it. So we'll get into that in a moment. So I'm going to go into reallocating casualties, and in this part it talks about shattered units. A shattered unit is when a unit has taken double the amount of their stamina value. These Italians here, these Samnites, their stamina value is normally a 6. They're medium infantry troops, so they're going to have a stamina value of 6. When they reach 6, they become shaken. If in the fighting, later on in another round, they reach 12, they will be shattered. A shattered unit doesn't take a break test. It is automatically destroyed and removed if it has lost the combat. That's something to remember when you're playing the game. You may have gotten, say, 12 casualties on this unit, but if it wins, it's not shattered. If you win or draw in a combat, then your unit is not shattered, even if they've taken double the stamina value. They have to have lost the combat to be shattered. So let's use, I'll use some white dice here because I don't have enough black dice. So let's say these guys are fighting, and it's the next round here. These guys are at 6 already. The Romans here are fighting, and these guys take 2 more wounds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, let's just say 1 more wound. And let's say that the Romans only take 1 wound here, and then the next round of combat, these guys take a further 6. So what you have to do before you remove a shattered unit, which I like to do, you should still take note of how much they lose the combat by. So we added 1 dice here to the Romans. They took 1 casualty, and these guys back here took 6. This unit took a further 6. So that means they still lost the combat by 5, because 6 minus 1 is 5. And remember, when you're doing the combat results, you are taking the results per round. You're not taking the previous round's casualties, okay? It's per round what you calculate for combat results. In any case, once you've seen, okay, well, these guys have lost by 6, and I see that the stamina value on them is double them, these guys are now shattered. They're just completely destroyed. They don't have to take what's called a break test. They're just gone. However, they did have a supporting unit, and that supporting unit will take excess casualties. This is what reallocating casualties is. It's when your fighting unit takes excess casualties and puts them on supporting units. Now, in this case here, this is a small Italian unit here. They only have a stamina of 4. So I only put 4 stamina points on them. That's because a unit that is either taking damage directly from fighting or taking a reallocated casualty from a fighting unit, they can never go over their maximum stamina value. Okay, so if these Italians were still here, let's say, and I've discussed this in previous videos. Now, let's say that, let's back it up a bit here. Let's say they took 6 wounds here, and then the Romans here, the Romans took 1, but then the Romans only dealt 2 in here. The Romans here have won by 1, because 2 minus 1 is 1. Okay, they've won by 1, and now we see that, okay, they haven't reached they haven't reached double stamina value, so this unit is not shattered, but they do have 2 points of casualties excess over their stamina value of 6. If you have a supporting unit, you want to put it on the unit that is, the book says, touching the enemy. Usually, supporting units aren't touching an enemy in my games. They're only touching the flanks or the rear of the allied unit. But what I do is I always say that put them on the closest unit to the combat. So in this case, I just throw them on this unit. Those 2 casualties will go on there. Now, a unit can never, if it's fighting or supporting, it doesn't matter, a unit can never end the turn or the round with over their maximum stamina value, okay? So these guys have 6, they ended the round with 8, they put the excess on this unit here, and they're still at 6. In the next round of combat, they start shaking, and they still have 6 casualties. Now, these guys over here have a stamina of 4, as I said, and they won't be able to go over. If these guys are dealt 3 wounds here in the next round, and they somehow are still fighting here, these 3 excess would go over here, but they can't go over the stamina value, so they'd only stay at 4, because their stamina value is 4. Okay? So at the end of the round, a unit cannot have more than their stamina value worth of casualties on them. If there was no support unit here, let's just move them out of the way, and the Romans here dealt 2 more casualties on these Italians, and there's no place to reallocate, these are just removed. Okay, at the end of the round, if they've survived and they're still fighting, they just stay at the 6 stamina value, their profile stat of 6, they just stay there, and then they start with the 6 casualties in the next round of combat, and they'll be disadvantaged, by the way, because if you get your stamina value, you'll be shaken. We'll talk more about that later, but they'll be shaken and have some disadvantages, and if they draw a fight, they're taking a break test anyway. And I should mention here that when you have a support here, let's do something unreal. Let's say that the Romans here fight them and they deal something like 10 points of damage. Okay, let's just throw on 10. It's got to be more than 10. It's got to be a lot. How many would that be? It'd be double. Okay, yeah, let's just put on a whole bunch. How many we got here? 6, 10, 14, and 15. We got 15 casualties on them here, okay? Look right? Yeah, it looks right. So you go through the combat, you put the excess, well, these guys, first of all, are shattered because they've got 14 casualties. So they're just outright shattered because they have double their stamina, and these Romans here don't have any casualties, so they've won, they're shattered. You put the excess amount on the supports. In this case, you see how many additional items we have here. The support unit can only take forever, and it cannot become shattered from this combat result. Instead, what will happen is a break test, and the break test will determine if these guys break or flee or what they do after. They may not necessarily shatter, they may just run away. So a support unit can never become shattered from fighting. They can never have double their stamina value, and they'll never be shattered from close combat results, ever. So they might break from a break test, but that's not, of course, that's a different thing, that's not shattered. So let's look at this here again. We're going to go into the break tests. There's a whole chapter on break tests, so we won't get into the details until the next part of this walkthrough. But for a break test, basically, it is what happens to the losing unit. You have to roll some dice and follow a chart that tells you what happens to the unit that is fighting. You find out what happens to the losers. So people who lost melee will have to take a break test. Sometimes people getting shot at will have to take a break test. We'll talk about that another time, but there's also break tests there. If a unit is fighting and is shattered, anything supporting it will have to take a break test. And if, let's put this scenario here, let's say that these guys are actually fighting and not just supporting, and the Italian, the Samnite side, loses. These guys are part of the same engagement here, so both units are taking a break test if they've lost. Break test results are modified by the casualties, the casualty amounts, and that's why you have to keep separate the amount of actual damage they're taking and the amount of damage taken per round, because you only calculate this per round. You don't calculate it on total amount of damage. So let's say they're fighting here and these Romans take 3 wounds, and that's the only unit in the Roman side that takes casualties, and then these guys take 2, and then these guys take 2. You don't look at one fight individually because these guys are all part of one engagement. You look at the whole. The Romans only took 3 casualties. In total, these units here took 4. That means the Romans, 4 minus 3, won by 1. These guys now, they're not shaken or shattered or anything. They're just in normal terms. They haven't reached their max stamina value. They have to take a break test. And that break test will be modified -1. So, and like I said, we'll get into break testing later. But it's important to every round calculate how much a unit has lost by, or if they draw, because that will determine the modifiers on the break test table. And every unit will be rolling for the break test here. So they've lost by 1. This whole engagement here, the Romans have won by 1. So these Italian units are -1 to their break test roll. Every unit has to take a break test roll separately. So if they lost by 1, these Samnites here would roll dice, and that's a total, what is that? I can't do my math. That's a 9, so 9 minus 1 would be 8, and that would be their result. They'd follow the break test. These guys here would also have to take a break test roll. 6 is not so good. 6 minus 1 would be 5, so that would be their result. Now, you might find that one unit on the break test fighting does really well in this kind of situation, but their buddies fighting over here do really poorly and they run away, leaving their friends in combat. So there are situations, and as Romans with 2 units fighting one standard unit, I meet this all the time, where one of my smaller units fighting a bigger one runs away, leaving their buddies behind because they haven't broken yet or they haven't given ground yet. So every unit that's involved in fighting has to take a break test if they've lost. Like I said too, if they're shaken and they draw the combat, then any unit that's drawn the combat and shaken has to take a break test. Normally, if you're not shaken and you draw, nobody takes a break test. I should also say here too that support units just follow the orders, and this goes on later in the break test section, I believe. They basically follow what the fighting unit does as a result of the break test. So if these guys lost the combat by 1 and they're the fighting unit, the support unit doesn't have to take a break test, okay? So support units are just throwing in attacks and they follow the fighting unit. The only time a support unit will take a break test is if this unit shatters or is broken. That's the only time. So yeah, support units never have to take break tests unless the unit they're supporting breaks or is shattered. Alright, and that's it basically for this chapter. I just wanted to cover the end of the hand-to-hand combat. The last part in the book here is talking about the end of combat, where basically a number of things could happen. I pointed out that they could give ground before and the other enemy follows. A unit could shatter and get destroyed. The winners of a combat after have choices. If you win the combat, you can follow an enemy that gives ground, or you could even make a free move. There's even something called a sweeping advance, but we'll look at that kind of stuff later. So that is it for today. In the next video, we're going to be starting the break test part of the game, the break test part of the chapter, which is a lot more detailed than what I showed you guys here. and it's not just hand-to-hand combat. Break tests can happen in many situations. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and if you like these videos, please like and subscribe to this channel. We will see you guys next time.